Author Rod Dreher, in his book, his excellent book, Live Not by Lies, writes these words. He says, consider this scenario. The alarm on your smartphone by your bedside buzzes you out of bed in the morning. While you were asleep, the apps on your phone uploaded the previous day information about your activities onto it on the app owner. You crawl out of bed and take a 20-minute run around your neighborhood. The Fitbit on your wrist records your workout information and uploads it. You shower, go into the kitchen to pour yourself a bowl of cereal, sit down at the kitchen table to check your Gmail account and Facebook. Everything you write on Gmail is processed by Google, which scans the text for keywords to direct advertising to you. Everything you post, like, or forward on Facebook is recorded by the company and used in its advertising. As you drive to work, sensors in your car record and report your driving habits because you allowed your insurance company to capture that data in exchange for a lower rate for safe drivers. All day long, the smartphone in your pocket sends data about its location, and therefore yours, back to your service provider. You are trackable at all times. And disabling location services in your device is not foolproof. All requests you make of Siri are recorded and monetized. All Google searches during the day, recorded and monetized. You go out for lunch and pay with your credit or debit card. Marketers know where you've eaten and match that data to your personal profile. Stop at the supermarket on the way home to pick up a few things and pay with a card. They know what you bought. Your smart refrigerator is sending data about your eating habits to someone. Your smart TV is doing the same about what you're watching. Your smart television will soon be watching you. Literally. There could be a little question. If he isn't already, Big Brother will be monitoring our behavior in the coming days. Did you bring a Bible with you today? Let's head in the direction of Daniel chapter 7, shall we? For the last several weeks, we've been camping out in this book, Daniel chapter 7. We've been plowing our way through. Covered the first half of chapter 7 last week. I'd like to pick up right where we left off as we head into our study today. Isaiah, Jeremiah, Lamentations, Ezekiel, Daniel. Boom, there it is. If you get to Hosea, Joel, Obadiah, and all those other guys, turn back the other direction. It will be helpful if you have the text open or if you have access to it. We also make outlines available if you want to fill in the blanks, jot down some additional references, and of course there will be additional references today. Our series, Against the Flow. Much like Daniel and company, we're citizens of Jerusalem, but we find ourselves living in Babylon. We find ourselves living in an alien culture that does not share our values. Let me give you just a quick synopsis, a short synopsis of where we've been. Remember, chapters 1 through 6 focus on Daniel's life. They're mainly historical with a minimum of prediction regarding future events. But once we get to chapter 7 through 12, there's a radical change, and the remaining portion of this book focuses not on Daniel's life, but on 4 prophetic revelations, 4 visions that he received from God. Last week we examined Daniel's first vision in the first part of chapter 7. It's a vision you'll recall that occurred, according to verse 1, in the first year of Belshazzar, king of Babylon. We said that would place us around 553 BC. It also means that Daniel is probably about 67 years of age at this time and still living under Babylonian rule. If you were with us last week, then I'm sure you'll recall that this vision revolved around 4 beasts. 4 beasts which we also discovered correspond to the 4 empires that were symbolized in Nebuchadnezzar's dream back in chapter 2. We also learned that in that 4th beast, we find representation of the Roman Empire. And yet the text seems to indicate an extensive time gap between the close of the ancient Roman Empire and a restored form that is yet to come. Or to say it another way, many scholars believe that we're currently living between two Roman empires. Why do scholars draw that conclusion? Well, in part, from verses 23 and 24 of chapter 7, where Daniel is given this explanation. The fourth beast is a fourth kingdom that will appear on earth. It will be different from all the other kingdoms and will devour the whole earth, trampling down and crushing it. The 10 horns are 10 kings who will come from this kingdom, and after them another king will arise, different from the earlier ones. He will subdue 3 kings. This text seems to indicate that in the last days, 10 contemporaneous kings will rule. 10 kings in a revived Roman Empire. But this morning our focus is on one of those kings in particular, the one who's designated here in Daniel chapter 7 as the little horn. I mentioned last week that there's general agreement among most Bible scholars that the little horn of Daniel chapter 7 is the same prophetic figure also known as the Antichrist in other portions of the Bible, specifically 1st and 2nd John. Other names would include the beast in Revelation 13, and then he's also called the man of lawlessness in 2 Thessalonians 2, all referring basically to the same guy, to the same coming historical figure. What exactly does Daniel chapter 7, especially the latter half, what does it reveal about this Antichrist, this little horn? 3 items in particular today. The first one would be the little horn's rise. Do you have the text open? Let's dive in at verse 15. This is exactly where we left off last week. I, Daniel, was troubled in spirit. And the visions that passed through my mind disturbed me, and I approached one of those standing there, and I asked him the true meaning of all this. And so he told me and gave me the interpretation of these things. The 4 great beasts are 4 kingdoms that will rise from the earth. And then I wanted to know the true meaning of the 4th beast, which was different from all the others and most terrifying, with its iron teeth and bronze claws. The beast that crushed and devoured its victims and trampled underfoot whatever was left. I also wanted to know about the 10 horns on its head and about the other horn that came up, before which 3 of them fell. The horn that looked more imposing than the others had eyes and a mouth that spoke boastfully. You'll notice that the Antichrist here begins his march to world dominion as a little horn. We saw that in the text last week, remember? Verse 8. And that reference seems to indicate that at first, he'll be essentially obscure. So he's not bursting on the scene with a glare of satanic splendor, but slowly winning his way, slowly making his move, coming to prominence only after that 10-kingdom confederacy has been established. But this much we can say with certainty: this little horn will not remain little forever. Although he appears on the scene later and smaller initially, he will not remain inferior. In fact, Daniel informs us in verse 20, you can see it there, that his countenance becomes imposing. It's a term that suggests greater or sturdier than the others. And so that last king of the restored Roman Empire will eventually become the leading ruler of that time. The text also indicates that he will somehow displace 3 of those kings, 3 of the other kings, and thereby gain leadership over the rest. That thought is emphasized in verse 20. And then again, you see it in verse 24, don't you? Where it states specifically that he will subdue 3 of the other kings. Now, we're not told exactly how he'll accomplish that, just simply that he will do it. A further description of this little horn is given, remember, back in verse 8. We saw that last week. We read that this horn had the eyes of a man. And I told you that emphasizes his humanity. I mentioned last week that it's probably indicative of great insight, intelligence, and unusual mental ability. And it's interesting, you see there at the bottom of the slide, verse 8, verse 11, verse 20, verse 25. 4 times here in Daniel chapter 7, we're told that this little horn is characterized by arrogant speech. Hence our title today, The Little Horn with a Big Mouth. The idea appears to be a self-exalted braggart with great persuasive ability. It leaves us with the impression that the Antichrist will rise to power during a time when people will be longing for deliverance from troublesome days. Indications are that this leader will be unusually intelligent with an overpowering personality. I like the way that Chuck Swindoll summarizes it here. He writes, he, the Antichrist, will have the oratorical skill of a John Kennedy, the inspirational power of a Winston Churchill, the determination of a Joseph Stalin, the vision of a Karl Marx, the respectability of a Gandhi, the military prowess of Douglas MacArthur, the charm of a Will Rogers, and the genius of a King Solomon. In addition, he will be empowered by Satan, and his incredible capabilities will be used against God's people. Here's the point. I believe the Scripture teaches very clearly that there will be a real person. We're not talking about a mythological personage here, a genuine person empowered by Satan who will rise on the world stage rather suddenly. We've covered the little horn's rise. Let's talk next about the little horn's lies. The Antichrist's verbal attacks are going to be aimed specifically in two directions. The text makes that clear. First of all, against God. You see it there in verse 25. He will speak against the Most High. And the word for against here is literally at the side of. At the side of. That indicates to us that this little horn will seek to raise himself as high as God. And he'll make pronouncements accordingly. Now, what's interesting is that what Daniel tells us here is later confirmed in the New Testament. The New Testament writers essentially back up everything that Daniel is telling us. And so, for example, if you look at 2 Thessalonians chapter 2, verses 3 and 4, it tells us that this man of lawlessness, you see the title, this man of lawlessness who opposes and exalts himself over everything that is called God or is worshipped. And he even sets himself up in God's temple, proclaiming himself to be God. Or we could go over to Revelation 13. Revelation 13, 5 and 6 says, the beast, again, another title for the Antichrist. The beast was given a mouth to utter proud words and blasphemies and to exercise his authority for 42 months. He opened his mouth to blaspheme God and to slander his name and his dwelling place and those who live in heaven. So you can see it there in the text. Revelation 13 makes it clear. Daniel 7 makes it clear. The little horn will not only verbally attack God, but it will also then attack God's people as well, right? Check it out, verse 21 and verse 25. Daniel says, as I watch, this horn was waging war against the saints and defeating them. And then again, he will speak against the Most High and oppress his saints and try to change the set times and the laws. And the saints will be handed over to him for a time, times, and half a time. Both of those passages, verse 21, verse 25, make it clear that the saints will be opposed by this little horn and will actually suffer at his hands. In fact, the Bible makes it clear that for a time, this world leader will prevail. Obviously meaning he'll be successful in his attempts. And the word there for oppress in verse 25, where it says he will oppress the saints, literally means to wear out, to harass continually, so that life becomes a wretched existence. That could include injustice, it could include seizure of property, it could even include physical persecution. So the question that naturally arises when we read those verses, right? Who are the saints? Who are the saints that are being referred to here? The word literally means the holy ones. And it's a term that's not been used in this vision up to this point, which would suggest that those designated have played no part in the drama until now. Now, many scholars and Christians will insist that the saints here is referring to God-fearing Jews. God-fearing Jews who are awaiting their true Messiah King. And yes, that word can be used in that manner. It's viable. That fits. But it can also refer to God's people in general. Well, not just God-fearing Jews, but those who have been made holy by putting their faith in Jesus as their Savior. So that term can go both directions. Usually, it's going to be interpreted on the basis of your eschatology. Eschatology, eschatos, is the Greek word for last. So eschatology is the study of last things, of prophetic events, of what's coming down the road. Most Bible students believe that the next event on the eschatological timeline, the last days timeline, is what we call the tribulation period. So currently there, if you look at the far left on the screen, we're in the church age. We don't know how long the church age will last, but we know that when it ends, we're going to enter a time known as the tribulation period. It's a 7-year stretch that will precede the culmination of all things. Now, the million-dollar question when we get to this subject is, where does the rapture occur? Where does this event where Jesus returns for his people occur in relationship to the tribulation period? Does it occur at the beginning, pre-tribulation? Does it occur at the halfway point, which would put you as a mid-tribulationist? Or does it come towards the end, which would put you in the post-tribulation camp? We all know how we would vote, right? Beam me up, Scotty, right? Get me out of here, right? We all know how we would vote, but of course we can't determine our theology based on popular opinion, can we? If you are committed to a pre-tribulation rapture, then the word saints here necessarily does refer to Jews or believers who are converted during the tribulation period. If you line up with a mid- or post-rapture position, it can refer to any believers in general. Now, for me to do a deep dive on the subject of the rapture goes beyond the parameters of this particular study. And even more difficult in a setting like this, a Sunday morning worship service. But I will say this much, okay? You always want to draw a distinction in your minds between the wrath of God and the persecution of man. Many will try to use the argument, well, most certainly we're going to be evacuated before the tribulation begins because believers are not destined to suffer the wrath of God. And I would agree with you at that point. Jesus took the wrath of God for us on Calvary's cross so that we wouldn't have to suffer that. But you can also make the case that a good portion of the tribulation period really is made up of persecution by man. Is there any place in the Bible where we as Christians are guaranteed that we won't face persecution by man? If you know of such a verse, please let me know so I can share that, okay? I haven't been able to find it. Instead, we're told repeatedly that we can expect to suffer. We can expect adversity when we align ourselves with Christ. And I could give you a lot of passages here. I'll just give you 1 Peter chapter 4, where the apostle says there, don't be surprised when you go through fiery ordeals, as though something strange, as though something unusual were happening to you. No, categorically, this is what we should expect. And so rejoice inasmuch as you participate in the sufferings of Christ, so that you may be overjoyed when his glory is revealed. If you're insulted because of the name of Christ, you are blessed. You are blessed, for the Spirit of glory and of God rests on you. One more point here. Before moving on, you'll notice that verse 18 tells us that the saints of the Most High will receive the kingdom and possess it forever. And the same kind of thought in verse 27, that the sovereignty, power, and greatness of the kingdoms under the whole heaven will be handed over to the saints, the people of the Most High. I always find it interesting that when the saints are being persecuted in verses 21 and 24, well, then that automatically has to refer to God-fearing Jews. But when it's the saints who are inheriting the kingdom in verses 18 and 27, then we don't mind including ourselves in that group, right? And my point is, you can't have it both ways. How long will the Antichrist rule? Well, the exact duration of his reign seems to be indicated by that cumbersome phrase you see at the last part of verse 25. The saints will be handed over to him for a time, times, and half a time. What in the world does that mean? Well, most believe that it refers to a singular unit, a plural unit, and a half of a unit, or 3.5 units. Most interpret 3.5 years. Why in the world would they interpret it to mean 3.5 years? Well, remember, it lines up with what we read just a little while ago, right? In Revelation 13:5, the beast was permitted to exercise authority for 42 months. How long is 42 months? 3.5 years. Very good. Not only that, but additionally, Revelation 12, verse 14, employs that same phrase, doesn't it? Time, times, and half a time. And the duration there, we're actually told, it's in that same reference, though it's not on the screen. Time, times, and half time. The duration is identified in that same chapter as 1,260 days. How long is 1,260 days? Want to take a wild stab? 3.5 years. Very good. You guys brought your A game with you today. How close are we? How close are we to the events of Daniel chapter 7? I'll acknowledge that every generation has thought of their generation as the last. And yet it seems without question that the pieces are falling into place. The pieces are falling into place for this succession of events. I would maintain that our world has never been more prepared for a worldwide dictatorship. I told you last week that there are already events in motion on this planet that I believe could pave the way for the arrival of this world leader. And I'll give you 3 of them today. We'll give you more further down the road, but we'll start with these 3. First of all, the push towards globalization. Part of the reason for the current situation on our southern border, the mess on our southern border, the reason in part is because those who are in power are convinced that national sovereignty needs to give way to global sovereignty. America must relinquish its position in the world to create a stronger United Nations that has the economic, environmental, and political power to readjust living standards for the entire globe. Globalism requires the world to become one big family of nations. And borders become obstacles that stand in the way of that particular vision. If you listen closely to the rhetoric of global elites, that will come through. That vision becomes clear. I'll give you one. Jean-Claude Juncker served as the president of the European Commission from 2014 to 2019. And on August 22, 2015, he made the statement that borders are the worst invention ever made by politicians. Listen closely, and you'll hear more and more of that type of language. Globalization would be that first trend. Secondly, financial uncertainty. We talked briefly a couple weeks ago that countries around the world are now dumping the dollar as their reserve currency. And it's happening more and more at an alarming rate. That, in part, is the reason we see banks collapsing, and many feel that it's likely that others will follow. So there's considerable discussion, again, among global elites about moving to central bank digital currency. You've heard about that, I'm sure. Nothing could serve the globalists better than a worldwide economic meltdown that would give the World Bank the opportunity to usurp the wealth of nations and begin to control the economy of the world. In accordance with socialist principles, your money would no longer belong to you. Instead, it would be portioned out by some world bank. With a fully digitized currency, wealth could then be more equitably distributed. It could also be monitored and even weaponized against those who don't want to play by the rules. So in other words, these funds become programmable, What do I mean by programmable? Well, the government could easily limit the way that you spend your money. They could shut down your account, for example, if you weren't wanting to spend on things that they considered unhealthy, maybe guns or ammunition, or perhaps fossil fuel. Or maybe you've just been going to fast food too often this week, and we're going to shut down your account. But you get the idea. And the financial uncertainty that we're sensing and feeling encourages this push towards a central bank digital currency. Lastly, modern technology surveillance. As I indicated in the introduction to the message today, electronic devices now make it possible to track your every move. China already is using it to monitor and ultimately control its citizens through artificial intelligence and facial recognition with a web of more than 200 million surveillance cameras. In fact, I think probably many of you are probably already aware, over the last few years, China has been testing what they call a social credit system. People are rewarded points when they comply with government and community expectations, and people are penalized when they don't. Your score is lowered. What lowers your score? Well, if you say something unfavorable about the ruling authorities, or you do things that are considered socially detrimental, even merely associating with somebody who's viewed as a negative influence could adjust your score downward. Some of you have picked up Erwin Lutzer's book. I've been referring to it some throughout this series, No Reason to Hide. He makes this statement in that book. He said, in 2017, Chinese authorities began installing surveillance cameras inside and around houses of worship. Ostensibly, the reason was for safety concerns, but of course that was only a pretext. Government officials came into the churches and installed cameras by force. Some pastors and worshipers who didn't agree to the move were dragged away. He says, throughout the past year, China has increased restrictions on religion, and the government now completely controls all online religious services and media across the country. Modern technology makes that possible. And so while we don't have a social credit system yet here in America, we do have ESG scores. And if you want to do some research on ESG scores, it's more applied to companies and businesses if you're not following and coming aligned with environmental, social governance principles. Can you see how under these types of conditions, is any of this starting to gel for you today? Can you see how under these kind of conditions we could easily be looking at Revelation 13 becoming a reality? You know, I've preached on prophecy a long time, over 40 years. And back in the day, as you read these passages, you go, I could see how maybe that could happen. Now, it's no longer a maybe, right? I mean, this is happening, and it will happen at some time. And so John says he's referring to the false prophet who's the Antichrist number one assistant. He forced everyone, small and great, rich and poor, free and slave, to receive a mark on his right hand or on his forehead in order that they could buy or sell. Unless they had the mark, no buying or selling, which is the name of the beast or the number of its name. That's where we get our 666. We've talked about the little horn's rise. We've talked about his lies. Let's hasten on at this point for some good news, right? And we'll talk about the little horn's demise. The great news for us today is that the authority and power of the Antichrist will not last. The devil and the beast will win a few battles along the way, but ultimately they lose the war. That's why we saw in 2 Thessalonians 2, we already saw that the Antichrist is referred to as the man doomed to destruction, right? Oh, I guess that was on that slide. The man doomed to destruction. But then that's 2 Thessalonians 2, verse 3. Go just a bit further into that same text, verse 8. See that the lawless one, the Antichrist, will be overthrown. He'll be overthrown by the Lord Jesus with the breath of his mouth and destroyed by the splendor of Christ's coming. So clearly his outcome is spelled out for us. And even here in Daniel 7, right? We kind of bypassed verse 11, but it's spelled out there. Then I continued to watch, Daniel said, because of the boastful words that this horn was speaking. I kept looking until the beast was slain and its body destroyed and thrown into the blazing fire. You see the consistency of Scripture? This is written 600 years before the Apostle John will write these words in Revelation 19. Then I saw the beast and the kings of the earth and the armies gathered together to wage war against the rider on the horse and his army. But the beast was captured, and with him the false prophet who had performed the signs on his behalf. With these signs he had deluded those who had received the mark of the beast and worshipped its image. The two of them were thrown alive into the fiery lake of burning sulfur. Their destination is secure. It will happen. In sharp contrast to that, over against that picture, there's coming a day. There's coming a day when a glorious kingdom will be established, and those of us who have professed faith in Jesus will be part of that eternal kingdom. We saw it already in verse 18 and 27, but let's go back and just reaffirm that truth. The saints of the Most High will receive the kingdom, and they'll possess it forever. Yes, forever and ever. And then again in verse 27, the sovereignty, power, and greatness of the kingdoms under the whole heaven will be handed over to the saints, the people of the Most High. His kingdom will be an everlasting kingdom, and all rulers will worship and obey King Jesus. Can you see how this is heavy material, right? It can be even a little bit distressing. And yet, over the centuries, it's been this book of Daniel that has been a source of real hope to millions of people who are experiencing persecution and suffering for their faith in God. Because clearly the message that comes through this entire book, however powerful the worldly beast might be, when they have done their worst, they can only destroy the physical body. They can't touch our souls. They can't destroy the person who is you. Jesus Christ, our King, will return, and he's going to take the reins of government from the beasts of the earth. The final ferocious expression of hostility towards God and his people will be destroyed, and the saints, those who have clung to God in spite of overwhelming odds, even martyrdom in some cases, will receive the kingdom. That is the constant message of the Scriptures. Let me see if I can make that clear as we wrap up. I want to begin with the birth announcement of Jesus. Do you remember what the angel said to Mary? He said, "Don't be afraid. You found favor with God. You're going to conceive and give birth to a son. You're going to call him Jesus. He'll be great. He'll be called the Son of the Most High. And the Lord God will give him the throne of his father David, and he will reign over Jacob's descendants forever." Say it with me. His kingdom will never end. Even before Jesus arrived, that promise, that guarantee, his kingdom will never end. Now look at this. Look how the book closes in Revelation 19. John says, "I saw heaven standing open, and there before me was a white horse, whose rider is called Faithful and True. With justice he judges and makes war. His eyes are like blazing fire, and on his head are many crowns. He has a name written on him that no one knows but he himself. He is dressed in a robe dipped in blood, and his name is the Word of God. The armies of heaven are following him, riding on white horses, dressed in fine linen, white and clean. And out of his mouth comes a sharp sword with which to strike down the nations. He will rule them with an iron scepter. He treads the winepress of the fury of the wrath of God Almighty. And on his robe and on his thighs he has this name written, King of Kings and Lord of Lords." Can I get an amen on that one today? Amen. That's what we have to look forward to today. That's what we have to look forward to today, folks. There's no question how things are going to play out. King Jesus will reign. And today we're actually going to share in the Lord's Supper. We're going to share in this ordinance we call communion that Jesus himself instituted. Before he left this world, he sat down with his closest followers. And he said, "I want you to practice this. I want you to observe this. I want you to continue to do this among my faithful ones until I come again," right? And so Hebrews 9:38 says, so Christ was sacrificed once to take away the sins of many. That's what Jesus did in his first advent. He came, he offered himself up on the cross in order to take away our sin, to deal with our sin problem. But the author goes on to say that he will appear a second time, right? He's coming back. This time not to bear sin, but to bring salvation to those who are waiting for him. Are you waiting for him today? Or are you looking forward to his return? The Lord's Supper is for those of us who have put our faith and trust in Christ as our Savior. If you've never taken that step of faith, you can do that where you're seated today. By simply acknowledging in prayer, silent prayer before God, Jesus, I'm a sinner in need of a Savior. I know I've failed you. I know I've disappointed you. Thank you for taking the punishment that I deserve. Thank you for going to the cross for me. I now put my faith in you. I believe you're everything you claim to be. And I want to live my life going forward in such a way that people can tell that I'm looking forward to seeing King Jesus soon. You pray that from your heart. You express that silently. And you enter into a relationship with Christ. I'm going to encourage you to peel back the foil over the bread. The night Jesus was betrayed, he took the bread and said, this is my body, which is for you. Do this in remembrance of me. Let's share the bread together, shall we? Peel back the foil. Peel back the foil over the juice. Jesus went on to say, in the same way, took the cup. So this cup is my covenant in my new blood. Whenever you drink it, do it in remembrance of me. For as often as you eat this bread and drink this cup, you proclaim the Lord's death until he comes, right? Until he comes. Let's share together. Jesus, we're so grateful today that we don't have to face the challenges of life alone. We have a living Savior who conquered the grave and who offers us that same assurance, that same promise, that we're going to enjoy that victory, that we're going to overcome death. We're going to conquer death because of what Jesus accomplished for us. And so we rejoice in that today. Lord, we want to stay faithful. We want to stay focused. We want to be living out our days in such a way that always pleases and honors you. And I pray, God, that we be challenged today that no matter what kind of pushback we encounter, no matter what kind of oppression we might feel or sense or experience, that we not lose sight of the goal. That we be proclaiming your death and resurrection through our lifestyle, through our words, through our actions, everyone that we come encounter with, God. I pray that would be a reality for us even this coming week. Encourage our hearts, God. Help us not to be overwhelmed with anxiety, apprehension, or fear, but to recognize that we serve the sovereign God of this universe, and you're bringing your plan to fruition. We are part of that plan, and we're going to experience your kingdom. We're going to reign with you in your kingdom forever. Because of that, Lord, even now we worship you. We gather that throng around your throne and express worthy. Worthy is the Lamb to receive all accolades, glory, and praise. Thank you, Jesus. We ask these things in your name. But we get on our feet as Gerald leads us, shall we?